everyone. Welcome back to the 2024 Cross Labs workshop After Babel, the quest for universal communication. Today we have our second session. But first, I want to make sure that I thank all of our organizers before again. So, of course, we have Olaf Witkowski, who is here today, Stephen Way, Oneris Rico, who is the director and doing everything behind the scenes, Luke Casper, who is behind the camera, Martin Beal, who is here as well, Jennifer Hoyle-Cuttle, who will be our moderator today for the panelists, and Paul Collignes, who will be moderating on Friday. So thank you all so much. You've all made this workshop possible. And of course, we have many different speakers and panelists to continue the discussion about universal communication and all the different subtopics that go along with it. And of course, you might be watching this on YouTube right now. And if you are, don't forget to subscribe to see our other content that's coming up in the future. We usually have more than one event every month, and you definitely don't want to miss these sorts of things. We have all sorts of discussions with all sorts of exciting people. All right, so we're going to dive right in really quickly. That way we have lots of time to talk about all the different ideas and discover different things and really have a really interesting brainstorming discussion. And of course, this is what our schedule looks like. Today is Tuesday in Japan, and we are talking about animal, cell, and non-human communication, including different things like fungi and plants, and maybe even different organs in our body. There's all sorts of things that really have communication and that even us humans aren't even aware of. I mean, maybe if we understood what non-human and animal cell communication looks like, then maybe I could tell my cat that I will feed him at 5 p.m. I promise, like I do every day. Maybe he'll get the point. All right, so the format today is going to be very similar to our format yesterday. So first, we're going to have our panelists do self-introductions. And then we are going to have a discussion among our panelists with our moderator. And then we're going to open up the discussion to other people who are in the call. And we're going to take some breaks as needed. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to our moderator, Jennifer Hoyle-Cuttle. All right, Jennifer, it's great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for moderating.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
That's a great start. Fantastic. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to join in this discussion. I'm really excited to hear what people have to say. It's really wonderful. Just to tell you who I am a lecturer in life sciences and a UK RI Future Leaders Fellow at the University of Essex in the UK. So I'm joining you from there. And of course, it's a very grey day outside, so that's why it looks like it's nighttime, and although it's in fact the morning here. It's really wonderful. Just to tell you who I am. Andrew, Professor Barron, would you like to start with a brief introduction for us?
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. You can hear me. Let's make sure that works.
Yes.
Thanks, mate. I'm Andrew Barron. I'm based in Australia. It is nighttime here, which is why it looks like it's nighttime here. I'm usually in the Blue Mountains on Darug country. I'm right now in Canberra on Ngunnawal country. We've got a meeting happening in Canberra at the moment, dealing with our bee problems that we're having here at the moment. How honeybees work, how the honeybee brain works, and how honeybee hives work. And I really don't know much about anything else.
I'm sure you are being far too modest. Well, we'll test you, we'll find out. Lana, can we hear from you? We'd love to hear more about what you're doing, where you are.
Sure, so I'm Lana Sinapayen. I'm an artificial life researcher at Sony Computer Science Labs here in Kyoto, not very far from Cross Labs. These days, I work mostly on astrobiology, normal biology, and cellular automata. I'm also an associate professor at the National Institute for Basic Biology here in Japan. And I think I was invited because my dog communicates with me using these soundboards with little buttons that the animals push.
That is amazing. I want to hear more about that. If you'd like to bring more in due course, that would be fantastic. Are we ready? Shall we start our discussion? So I thought perhaps we could start thinking about one of the questions which was proposed on the schedule, as that's something that people might have had a chance to think about, and they might be very eager to kind of express themselves and think about that idea. But I wondered if we could broaden it out a bit. So we were, one of the questions we were given to think about for this session was, what do we know about animal communication? So I wondered if we could start by thinking about that, but broadening that out a bit. So thinking about animals, but also maybe non-animal entities that are relevant to some of the areas of your interest and expertise. And perhaps you might like to bring in also what we don't know, what some of the known unknowns are at this stage. Now I wanted, Andrew, would you like to start us on this, as you do work on an animal system, and then perhaps we could kind of broaden the discussion from there to kind of go outwards, if that works out.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to work on bees for a ridiculously long time. And the thing that always stands out about the bee is what's sometimes called the honeybee dance language. I prefer to call the honeybee dance communication, which is, since time immemorial, been this remarkable thing that bees do. And it is one of very few examples where we've got clear symbolic communication happening between bees in a hive. They harvest information about where a valuable food source is. They represent that information symbolically in the hive through dance movements. Other bees can decode the information communicated through the dance and then use that information to inform their own foraging decisions. So it has all of the elements of symbolic communication. To me, what makes it even more impressive, though, is that this is an innate communication system. It's not learned. And back when I was a postdoc, I constructed beehives from bees, plucked at the moment of emergence. So I could absolutely guarantee they had never seen another dance. And I was hoping that I'd see some sort of ontogeny, some sort of development for dance language. And as far as I could tell, using the tools available at the time, they just kicked it off. They just danced, and they were perfect. We've since learned, this is James Nye's work, thanks to updates in camera technology and him doing better experiments with better resolution, that there is an element they learn. They fine-tune their communication of distance among each other, sort of a social learning refinement. But other than that, they've got this somehow. We have still this enduring mystery that we have an evolution has somehow enabled the bee to perform symbolic communication with almost no learning. And that still fascinates me. That still absolutely amazes me.
That's fantastic. So there are a few things there that are really interesting. I wondered, you mentioned that you have in your mind a sort of definition of what communication is, and you use the term symbolic communication. So did I understand that you feel there are sort of key elements that include a sender and a receiver and a message between them? Is that the essence, or is there anything else that you think is the kind of definitively needed for communication?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm partly betraying my age and also partly betraying being trained in zoology, particularly. And in zoology, a lot of work was done to differentiate things between signals. When we're talking about animal communication, we talk about the difference between a signal and a cue. And a cue you can think of as something you can eavesdrop on. So a cue is something that an animal does, or that we might perceive, or that other animals might perceive, that correlate with the piece of information that is maybe not intended to be sent. We can use it to extract information, but it probably hasn't evolved for that function. Whereas a signal is something that the animal is sometimes actively engaging, but what differentiates a signal from a cue is the signal has evolved to communicate a specific type of information. And often there's all sorts of features that go along with that. And in dance communication, it's very, very clearly that we've got a refined evolutionary communication system. The dance movements are highly refined to precisely communicate to other bees specific information. And the bees have evolved very specific stereotype ways that they extract that information from the dance. And a lot of my thinking, I'm realizing, has been informed by this distinction between a cue and a signal, which I think in terms of think about animal communication is quite useful.
Lana, I'd just like to invite you. What do you think about this? I mean, I'd like to know just what you think generally about what we know about communication in general. But I was particularly wondering if you had any thoughts on this idea of very stereotyped evolved communication in non-animal systems.
First, I think that what Andrew said is very interesting, especially 2 points. The first thing is it's very strange to try to imagine humans being born able to have symbolic communication. Like imagine you're born and we all have the same language when we are born and we're trying to communicate with each other. I can't really imagine. I find this very fascinating. And the second thing is, so when I communicate with my dog using these buttons, I mean, you can believe that they work or that they don't work, but whether they work or not, if they work, it's the complete opposite of the bees, because dogs aren't born knowing how to push buttons that correspond to words and that make the human do something, right? It's completely learned. And I really don't believe that they are born with this ability to attach some specific symbol to some specific concepts. And I would say that the question that you ask is very paradoxical, because once we know a lot about communication inside a species, we can know more about this communication, right? But if we don't even know how the communication is taking place, we have no way to really study it. I mean, if we knew how to communicate perfectly with I don't know, with some kind of new species, it would be the easiest way to learn about their communication, by communicating with them. So I think it's a problem of, you know, the chicken and the egg. If you don't know how to communicate with them, how can you study their communication? But you have to start somewhere.
That's fantastic. Andrew, at any point, please do jump in, join in, respond at any point. We also have with us Olaf Witkowski from Cross Labs. So Olaf, please do also feel free to kind of interject at any time and join in. So that, Lana, that links to, I think, one of the other questions that we've been given to think about for the session, which is what is preventing us from communicating with animals, or indeed more generally entities. And I was kind of giving that some thought, and I was wondering if we were able to decode the language of an animal. So it seems like we're, especially I'm very excited about data processing, machine learning techniques for analyzing large amounts of behavior simultaneously, quite complex behavior. It seems possible now. I mean, we're seeing people mapping behavior to, say, vocalization in non-human animal species, and of course more broadly. Does that get us any closer to being able to communicate in two ways? I can see there might be a totally pessimistic view that gets us no closer to communication, or you might be more optimistic. What do you think about that?
I would say there are two big things that prevent us from really making, you know, huge progress in this type of field. The first is everyone has lots of ideas about communication and language, and especially lots of, I would say, almost superstitions. When you look at the rise of generative AI and language models, which I think a lot of people like me think it's not really language, but for a lot of other people, no, this is language, it's writing text, it's communicating with me. How is this not language? I think this kind of almost impossible to avoid feeling that if you read a text and the text makes sense to you, it means that the thing that generated the text is able to communicate with you. And at the same time, there's a lot of like the opposite superstition that only humans can communicate, for example, or only humans have some high level of communication. And therefore, if you think that your dog can communicate something to you, you're anthropomorphizing them too much, or you're a bit dumb or a bit silly. That I would say the first problem is this kind of the fact that we all have a lot of thoughts about language that aren't necessarily rooted in data. And the second thing I would say is maybe a lack of imagination, even from me, because before I bought this little system for my dog, I didn't really believe the videos that I was seeing. And now that I believe that this is true, I wonder, why didn't this happen 50 years ago? It's just a button with a recorded word. Like, why did nobody try that? I don't know what Andrew thinks.
About the dog buttons?
About what do we need to make more progress in this field of communication studies?
Look, I think I share your skepticism about using something like a deep neural network to just try to line up behavior with vocalizations. I think that I completely agree with you. We will run into the problems that we would anticipate from that. It would give us interesting associations and correlations. There'd still be a lot of work that would need to be done in that to pull out what is the intention of the animal, to map it up, and even more work to go forward into actually being able to turn it into meaningful two-way communication. In terms of, I mean, dogs and buttons, I think with the system that you've got brilliantly shows the capacity of dogs to learn. And I mean, dogs are fantastic at learning to communicate with us and to work past our own limitations to interpret them. And they're very, very good at using their behavior to communicate what they need in a way that a human can actually get it. I see this in my own dog all the time. I'm very tempted to buy a set of the buttons now. I haven't played with them yet, but I'm now even more tempted to give it a shot. Of course, like you, I think my dog is the smartest organism in the entire universe. We can trade dog pictures later.
Absolutely.
That's great. I have a parrot, so I think that my parrot is the smartest non-human around. But we can, I'll set that aside rather than having a kind of pet-off competition here. That's fantastic. It was really interesting.
I think the parrot is actually very interesting because it's almost in between the AI issue and the dog thing, because the parrot can use human words, right? So you're tempted to feel like it's easier to feel like they are communicating with you because they are using your own words, like an AI. But also like a dog, they can learn a lot of stuff, so they are really communicating something.
Things does your dog use this machine to tell you if that's or what impression do you get that it's wishing to convey, if there's any intention really there?
Well, initially I didn't think much of it. I gave him like two buttons. It was play with a ball or play with another toy, and he learned to use it. And well, that's not very surprising because dogs can easily learn to associate two actions, right? I do this and this happens, so that's not so impressive. But now he has 80 buttons, and he makes complex sentences that have a grammar, sentences that I don't necessarily use. He makes up new words when he doesn't have the right buttons. He talks about the future and the past. He talks about people who aren't there, right in the room with us. He can tell me if it's going to rain or not. I mean, I'm always in between being super impressed and also being very skeptical because, I mean, I didn't expect. I had dogs when I was little, lots of dogs. And I feel like if dogs were that smart, I would have noticed, but also clearly I didn't. So
yeah, this really gets at the difficulty of the kind of key importance of intention, the intention and capability behind the mechanism of communication, and our total inability to get to that and understand what it is, it seems to me. Although perhaps again I'm being too pessimistic there. So this is thanks to there's when I was thinking about this, I thought back to some of the fiction that particularly I read as a young person that related to animal communication that really excited me as a young person and probably contributed to my interest in studying zoology and natural history. And kind of wanting to interact with animals in particular. And I thought about two things. So I thought about firstly reading as a young child the Dr. Dolittle stories, which are the absolute classic for, you know, fiction portraying communication with animals. And I also thought back to a wonderful story by the writer Ursula Le Guin, which is called The Author of the Acacia Seeds. And I found a copy of this online, so I dug it out yesterday because I was thinking back to it and wondering how well I remembered it. And I did remember, so I read this when I was a teenager, and it really struck me and it stayed with me. So I've just reread it, which was great. And I'll try and navigate to the Discord to put a link to that. But otherwise, it is possible to find it by Googling it if anyone's interested in reading it or rereading it. So this is a fantastic story where it's a sort of a fake journal of animal communication, and we see some kind of bulletins in the journal, and one of these is about the discovery of some messages written on seeds by an ant. And it's beautifully written, so I'm not going to be able to convey the beauty of this, but this ant is expressing some sort of rebellious feelings, and the story looks at the difficulty of kind of trying to translate or interpret this. But the ant seems to be expressing a sort of desire to kill the queen, to rebel against the queen in the nest. So this is imagining a kind of scenario where we find that actually so many entities in the world around us have this kind of capability and this intention to communicate, and it's I think a really beautiful story that this is opened up to us, and we can read all these messages and understand all these kind of intentions that were there all the time. So this is really getting at, you know, do these things exist in the world? Do these entities have these capacities? Are they kind of communicating intentions that we have a hope to read, or are those intentions and capabilities just not there in this kind of, I think, this way in which we have a desire to read or to understand? Andrew, I wonder, as you are an expert on on insects and Hymenoptera, can you tell us so there are rebellious behaviors in these kind of colonial insects. To what extent could that be described as having a kind of rebellious intention that we can equate to some of the kind of rebellious poetry or writing of humans? Or in what way is it sort of an empty, if you see what I mean, and lacking this depth to it?
Oh, heck, mate. That's big. How long we got? So there's two parts to that question. One is the specifics about the rebellious behavior, the social rebellious behavior that we see in social insects. And the other is about the intention that sits behind any behavior in an insect. And look, that's the question that basically motivated my entire career. That was the question that I asked myself as a PhD student. Particularly with the insects, there is this dualistic view, and we see it in terms of how humans view them. We also see that in terms of how science operates with insects. One view is that you view it as a small automaton. You view it as a machine, and you model its behavior as a machine, and you see it as highly deterministic. And the other is that you view it as a cognitive agent in its own right. And you know, the extent of its cognition is an open question, but you view it as an independent agent operating with free will. And it's that debate that got me into the career that I've had. And that's the question that's basically been driving most of my research for the last almost 3 decades. He said, feeling really old currently. Olaf knows why. So I think that for myself, I'm getting to answering that question. But then in terms of specifics of rebelliousness in the colony, yeah, I used to work on anarchist honeybees, the rebel bees, the ones who would basically sneak their own reproductive capacity in past the queen and hide their eggs in the corners of the hive. What was interesting about that, though, is that we could show very clearly that was strongly genetically driven behavior. So again, we defaulted to the interpretation that this is a genetic variant. It's inducing a different stereotype pattern of behavior in these organisms. But that doesn't answer the deeper question of, what is the extent of the agency in that organism? And that's the question that I continue to enjoy wrestling with.
There's something in those behaviors that sounds deeply human, right? And we are using all those words obviously to express all that because we're using human language for some reason. It feels like we're using things like rebellious, manipulative, all those things that we understand as human-to-human society, social relationships, right? Behaviors that are embedded within human culture. And it's hard to get away from that frame. I was wondering what are the dangers of using those. I mean, it's a very good way, a bit like I was going to refer to ChatGPT, but I should probably not. People do that a bit too much these days. But at the very least, you're sort of introducing a very high bias that helps you at first. I definitely personalize, anthropomorphize all my simulations and view them as being angry or super nice in a nice mood. Those are just very simple creatures at times. It helps me do my research, but definitely introduces biases. So what's the danger of overinterpreting those less or more complex signals?
I would
or
say
cues?
the opposite. Like, I think there's a danger in not using these words. In that camp, I'm with Franz de Waal, who started his career in a time where it was very bad. It was viewed as very bad to use human words to describe anything animal, including for chimps or bonobos. And so he was trained to never use words like friendship or like, having a good interpersonal relationship between two chimpanzees or something. And he argues that by using this kind of roundabout ways to talk about things that are basically friendship and stuff like that, we are preventing ourselves from using the simplest explanation to a behavior, which is, yes, these two monkeys, these two apes, they stay together and they enjoy each other's presence because they have a friendship. And if we don't call it friendship, we're not being scientific.
That's super interesting. So there is okay, I'll compare this to chess or my favorite game. So it's the game of Go. Like Japanese or Chinese chess. The way you review games afterwards is you can go two completely different ways. And if you're close friends, maybe you're going to say, this was a bad move. Oh, you were angry here. This was very aggressive. This wall is very influential. All those very humane, very culturally embedded words. Or you can use the technical words and you don't even say I or you. You say white or black. Did that. You use third person. You sort of distance yourself. And it feels like we sort of switch back and forth between those two languages. Definitely professionally in those sports, you tend to use third person because you don't want to involve yourself too in a sort of drama or anything. It should be professional, right? But it does help using those sort of emotionally, even the professional words are emotionally charged at first, right? And it sort of helps empathizing within that space. That is, we don't live in chess, right? So somehow maybe there's something in there. Maybe it helps, yeah. Like I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yes, but there is a big difference between a simulation or a game of Go and a chimpanzee or human or a dog, which is the evolutionary distance. We are very close to chimpanzees, so if we say they have a friendship, it's maybe not that strange to say because we evolved a long time we have a very close ancestor. But your simulation or the game of Go or the little, pieces, not pieces, the little things of Go, they don't have a common evolutionary history with you. So anthropomorphizing them is kind of maybe less justified than doing the same with the chimp. Or maybe even, with the jellyfish, we are very far away from jellyfish. So you could argue that, no, we shouldn't use words like the jellyfish wants to eat this thing.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think what matters, I guess, is whether we're right or wrong in our in our description, or in our kind of is there a justification for our empathy? And I guess a lot of that's great, that kind of evolutionary history we're using as a clue, I guess, a proxy for whether we might be right or wrong. But when we lack that, we don't have this we don't have this clue. We have to make our judgments. This reminds me of something topical. We had a few days ago the announcement of the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness, and I have, I just read this as a member of the kind of reading public in this respect. Perhaps there are people here who are involved with that in some way, or have been following it closely. But everyone, I think it's for everyone a kind of topical area of interest. I wondered what your thoughts are on the relevance of communication and our ability to communicate for this kind of ethical question of how we should treat other entities. So obviously we have the risk of both underestimating and overestimating their capacities. As from memory, I think the Declaration has said that the initial people who have signed, who are kind of generally they're academics who have expertise regarding different kind of groups of animals and their capacities for consciousness. They have given confidence in the extension of the status of conscious being to mammals and birds, with the possibility for including other non-human animals, such as kind of arthropods. There was some cited evidence on groups like crayfish. So yeah, what do you think about, I guess, the role of communication here on both sides, our capacity to recognize consciousness, and I suppose the ethical dangers each way of either overestimating or underestimating this ability?
I want to talk about AI, but I'd like Andrew to go first because he can talk about real animals.
Lana, do you want to go first, mate? I don't want to kind of hog it. I'm happy to go first if you want me to jump in.
Okay, so I will start. First, I'm not a big fan of the word consciousness and of consciousness research, sorry. But I think there is a strong human bias towards seeing communication as a sign of consciousness or as a necessary thing for consciousness. And you could really see that in the story of the Google guy. So first there were these image generative AI models that were generating super awesome images, and people thought, oh yeah, this is very impressive. And then there were the text generators, and people weren't like, oh, this is impressive. They were like, oh, it's alive, it's sentient, there is consciousness here because it's using language. Even if both were kind of doing the same thing, nobody thought the image generating model was conscious or like super intelligent. But as soon as this data became text instead of images, a lot of people were really convinced that this must mean this AI is conscious. And one guy at Google was, I don't remember if he left or if he was fired for writing a long rant about how his model is very conscious because the model said I'm conscious or something like that. So that's just my point.
I'll associate that to the point earlier about projecting the meaning space onto one creature's language. And if you project onto human, every sounds like it's human, and you'll translate. You might mistranslate something by conscious, and then now you might overinterpret the meaning. Yeah. So and that's exactly what happened. Yeah. Sounds exactly right.
So I'm really glad, Lana, that you did go first, because I think that's a really, really insightful point that relates to what's happening in the animal space at the moment. So that declaration, just to be clear, I helped to frame that declaration, and I'm one of the signatories of it. And back in 2016, I wrote a paper on what insects can tell us about the origins of consciousness, which also presented a biological hypothesis for how and why the insect brain supports the specific type of consciousness that I think that an insect is capable of, which I'll say quickly is really, really very minimal, but it's not zero. The problem on relying with things like communication, and the declaration actually the declaration does a job of grabbing what could be considered markers or signatures of consciousness of various types, of which certain types of communication complexity could be considered in animals to be a marker of consciousness. But the declaration also, there's going to be a very long extended appendix that goes with the declaration, which is going to be coming out soon. There's utility in that signature indicator type approach when taken in its totality. So you wouldn't necessarily rely on just one thing and go, that shows that something's conscious, that doesn't. But if you look at multiple different markers, you can be more confident, perhaps, in saying we're more likely to expect consciousness in this organism than not. I think the AI case is much, much, much more complicated, because often in AI, we've designed a system to appear to be something when it's fundamentally not. We can run into the same problems in how we interpret animal behavior, especially in domesticated animals. So we do need to be careful with that. Personally, I'm much more in favor of using a combination of approaches, not just the behavior that the animal manifests, but also getting deep into the mechanism of how it is manifesting that behavior, because I think that also helps us to understand whether or not this thing will have a certain type of consciousness, recognizing that consciousness is multi-component, multiply decomposable, multiple different types. So we're not talking about it as a yes, no, on, off type phenomenon.
Amazing. I think, yeah, this is so important, and it's true that it's so complex. There are so many features that we have to consider, and each of them should sort of supplement our understanding of non-human diverse intelligences, and intelligences. It's not only consciousness; it's like all the other types of features, and treating them, not using the word consciousness would be ideal, and be using only the more precise words, pointing at very specific, I guess, properties of cognition would be helpful. That's the direction that we went in with the. I don't know if Eric Schwitzgebel is in the room. He'll be here on Friday when we'll focus more on ethics. So I think we'll talk much more about this topic. And in that paper, we sort of end up saying that we should err on the side of safety if we don't know. And maybe it's something that Dominic, when we go into discussion, who is, I think, connected in the room or will be soon, he and I think about interfaces, I think, with diverse kinds of animals or other things, and letting the species or the entity interact with the other lets you empathize. Let's suppose that you don't interact with a species at all because you live in a different medium with different kinds of behaviors. You don't share degrees of freedom very much. It's going to be very difficult for you to evaluate, to empathize with the entity and evaluate anything. So creating the interface in the first place might be the first step we should design if it's non-existent before we decide on anything.
Related to that, I want to point out that even with fairly complex communication like I have with my dog, it's surprising how much I don't understand him. Like, he can do stuff that I thought he couldn't possibly do, like talk about the future and stuff like that. But some very simple things he's unable to do, like if I show him an object and I ask, what is this object? He will give me a random answer. And not all dogs do that. Some dogs can answer perfectly. Mine, he doesn't understand the question, like, what is this? He cannot answer that. And I've tried to cheat and teach him, okay, when I say, what's this? You should say bottle. But my dog is very, very stubborn. And I wasn't able to teach him that. Even if it's a simple thing. I show you that, you touch this button. I even reduced the board to 2 buttons. And he would still answer completely randomly. So even with the ability to communicate using noun, verbs, and tenses and stuff, I still don't understand how his brain works.
There are a few things, there are lots of different threads there. One thing I was interested in is there kind of this idea of both broadening out our understanding of communications so that we are not looking so kind of narrowly, particularly in animals. But then the other side of that is, what is the difference? Or how can we practically recognize something that is communication versus just watching behavior in general? So the behavior of an animal tells us something about what that animal is doing and what its possible intentions are. How can we practically distinguish what we should analyze as communication without being too narrow? So we want to capture a phenomenon, but how do we stop ourselves from just watching the whole of behavior and sort of correlating behavior with itself, if you like, in a circle? Andrew, perhaps you have some thoughts on this, because you're engaged with kind of this practical question in your research, and then perhaps we could kind of move out from there if you have any ideas.
I mean, I can. It's a question that a lot of researchers struggle with, particularly when they're starting working with a new species or looking at or trying to untangle communication, the details of communication in even quite a well-known species. I can talk about the kind of methods that have been used and what works. You do start off with correlations, and you draw ethograms, and you look at the context, and you look at how the context influences how the animals display, move. You look at how observers, receivers respond to the movements, displays, sounds, vocalizations of other animals. All these become, though, correlations. What really starts to take you beyond that is when you move into playback, or when you start to manipulate the communication system or intervene on the communication system. And meaningful interventions, meaningful on the communication system, really help you start to take it apart. So the classic is a playback. You know, you play back a signal, you play back a call, you make a prediction about, well, if this is communicating that, then the receivers who hear it in this context should respond in this way. And you can make really tight hypotheses. And then either you prove or you disprove that, and then you take the next step and you move in that way. Even with dance communication, this is what really cracked it. Axel Mikkelsen built a robot bee that he could insert into a beehive that would recreate the movements. And he made very clear predictions of, if this movement is communicating that location, the bees following the robot bee, they should go to that spot. And you know, that's the kind of, I'm all in favor of intervention as a tool to move us beyond correlation in science. And it's over and over again, it's proved important in taking apart communication systems.
I want to ask you something, Andrew, which is not related to the broader question, but if the robot bee is lying, do the other bees end up not trusting it, or do they just always do what the robot bee says?
So, okay, will you indulge me for a second? Because that's brilliant. So there was still a huge debate that rattled on for decades around honeybee dance communication, in that, what are the bees actually communicating? Are they really communicating a space, a point in time, a point in space, or is what's happening, they're coming in, they're smelling of a certain bush, and all that happens is the bees go out, they fly around until they smell that bush, and of course they end up in the same spot. That was the essence of the debate. The way they solved that debate was they found a way to make the bees lie, about location in their dances. And then they showed that what happened was the follower bees, the recruits, didn't go to the bush. They went to the location that was lied about. They went to the other, so they were clearly following the movement indicating the dance. So sometimes making an animal lie helps you take apart the communication system even more.
But there is no trust system in bees then. You can lie as much as you want and people will just listen to you.
You know what? You're putting me down a total rabbit hole here, mate, but there is. Because if the bees find out that someone was dancing for a place that was inaccurate, wrong, or just bad, they will come back to the hive. And if they see other bees or the same bee dancing for that spot, they leap on her and shake her. Just stop it. which is, you know, when you think
Stop
about
lying.
yeah, stop it, just stop it. And I mean, the cognition involved in that is wonderful. This real-time translation back to, okay, you're advertising that spot. Well, I know that spot is a bad spot to go. So no, enough, no more. So the dance floor regulates itself in terms of what should and should not be advertised to the colony.
I really wish this worked for social media.
Shake.
Seems so simple. I wonder, yeah, I had a similar question, right? It wasn't about lying as much as it was about trickery and what's this? I guess some sort of manipulative behavior because you said robot bee, there's the robot cockroach, there's a robot, a bunch of those, right? Which I always found fascinating, where you impersonate, you have your agent infiltrating this community, and you're just passing as something else. In a way, nature is already doing this with a bunch of hackings, and those are what parasites are, right? And those can be viruses or any. You have those at different scales and different types of cognitive beings. But there is something universal about biological security, I guess, like computer security and biological cryptography. So a way to always recognize each other and find out, oh, you are the odd one. Let's not listen to you. Yes, let's shake you, and if you don't change, maybe we'll kick you out. I don't know. There seems to be something universal about that that surrounds always the establishment of a language. There's also some sort of trust system, and it reminds me of the study on humor that Dan Dennett, who recently passed away, just was championing I think a decade ago, right? The study of humor being this mechanism of finding the odd one in your community, right? Because they wouldn't know about the tiny little it's really a social fine-tuning system. I wonder if there's something universal about that. So maybe it's not lying, it's something like it. It's like this really the computer security version of that.
Speaking about humor, there is a kind of a debate in the button community about whether dogs have humor or not, because some dogs appear to make jokes, and you know that there's a dog laugh, you know, they open their mouth really wide and they laugh, basically, not like a human. And one of the most famous example of that is Bunny the dog, with a confusing name, but she's a dog. And there's another dog that came to her family, and she said that this dog is a cat, and then she was laughing. And clearly the dog is not a cat, and there was a cat in the house, so she knows what a cat is. And even my dog, one of the strangest things he did when he was maybe 1 year old, he said he was mad, and I asked, why are you mad? And he said, Lana eats toy. Like, he seemed to accuse me of eating his toy, and then he was mad. But he wasn't acting mad. And I never understood if he really thought I disappeared his toy by eating it, or if he was making a joke. And there are some other examples of, sometimes it looks like, you know, dogs may have some kind of sense of humor.
I'm going to demote my parrot in the hierarchy here. I was saying, so my parrot can laugh at punchlines, but he's learned the intonation of a joke. So when people, you know, they talk the talk, they pause and they say, and this is the punchline, and then the little parrot will go, which strikes me as quite adorable and tragic at the same time. But he loves to join in with this social interaction, but he has no idea what was said in the joke, what it means. it's too complicated. And I wonder if he has a sense of humor. He definitely has a social desire, a desire to follow our cues and to be involved with our behavior. But I think that it's all the appearance of a sense of humor, or at least the appearance of the application of a sense of humor in that setting, without, again, with an emptiness behind it in that respect. But I don't mean to say the same thing about your dog. You know your dog, and I don't know about your dog.
He doesn't make a lot of jokes, so I'm a bit skeptical. But some other dogs, it really appears like they have a bit of a prankster personality, especially towards other animals in the house. You know, if they want to get this toy and the other dog is already playing with it, they will lie about, oh, there's a bird outside, and then the other dogs get up and up, I can get the toy. That's maybe just, manipulation, or could be a form of, pranking and doing something that I find funny. Like crows and ravens are famous for having a really developed sense of humor and pranks.
I was always wondering if so there are ways in which even your closest friends or my life partner and I, we understand each other. We feel like we understand each other very, very well, and we use a simplified language like close friends do, right? Where you have invented some words that mean something fairly complex, and you don't have to exchange that many signals to understand things in certain situations. Now, it may be that at some point you experience that with a close friend, and yet you misunderstand one situation, and it makes you think, oh yeah, we were sort of on two parallel trajectories, and everything else matched, except, oh, we didn't think about this being different, and now it's everything. The whole experience is completely different from this new perspective, right? We thought we understood each other. It feels like a sort of quantum, like a memory where you have a saving of both are possible, and they're not mutually exclusive until you encounter those kinds of new examples. And it strikes me that maybe language is a lot like that. It's we deeply misunderstand each other in terms of experience, but it's okay because it works out. It's a very Wittgensteinian kind of thinking. But on the other hand, maybe there's Daniel Polanyi was talking often about constructive misunderstanding, which is a concept I really like. So you can misunderstand deeply people very close to you or not in this way, but then you can still use this as a meta mechanism. As a meta mechanism to learn, right? But you learn together using that. So maybe there's something super interesting about this. I was always excited about this.
I mean, that's the principle behind what's it called? Something karaoke, science karaoke.
I know, I love that. Yeah.
So you have to present somebody else's slides, but you don't know their field, you don't know what they were going to say, and you have to invent something. And you might actually get some insight from hearing someone else trying to interpret your results and your figures.
Yeah, you sort of impersonate, pretend you're them, pretend you know. And there is some value to pretending you know. What is it, like fake it till you make it? I don't really believe in that, but I guess there is something to it, maybe. If that's the case, that's exactly it. Is there such a thing in the animal world, Andrew? What do you think? Do some of those fake it till they make it? Is that a mechanism?
Oh, heck. Look, anybody who works on avian societies would say yes. Where you get these kind of highly hierarchical dominance hierarchies established, a lot of it is kind of, yep, I am going to keep presenting, I'm dominant and hope I'm not challenged too much. So there is fake it till you make it in animal societies. Usually you make it and then you fake it for as long as you can while slowly losing condition. I can empathize with that.
I read a study that said that in group of chimpanzees, they measured the stress of each individual and they compared to the rank of this individual, and they found that the higher in the social ladder you are, the more stressed out you are. Like if you're the top guy who has to make all the decisions and is always challenged, you are very stressed. Maybe because you know you're kind of faking it and you're like, what if you have imposter syndrome? You know, what if they find out?
I think you do the same with academics. You should see my cortisol level, mate.
Well, that seems like a nice place to take a little break and and relax for a few moments, drink some water, maybe some tea. I will try and find the link to the story that I mentioned and put that in the Discord channel if we can locate that, and I can get on there. Alyssa, do you have any more announcements for us?
Well, I don't think I have anything at this moment. But I am. Oh, thank you very much. I don't think we have anything at this moment, but yeah, we're going to take a little bit of a break. But Andrew, during the break, if you could share that a video or something of that robot bee, I really want to see that. All right. Okay.
I'd also love to have a link to Lana. Do you have any online material showing the amazing ability of your dog to communicate? If we could have a link to that, that would also be marvelous. And if you haven't yet, please record more on the internet for
Yes,
us.
I
We'd
do
love to see it.
have. I posted to the Discord a link to a collection of links with titles. This is my dog talking about the past. This is my dog doing something else, something or other. So if you go to the Discord and click on that link, you have a list of links.
And
Marvelous. Okay.
can I share that on YouTube as well? Would
Sure.
that be okay? Okay. So I'll post it to the YouTube as well so people can see it there. So everybody can see Cookie, the marvelous talking dog. Okay. We'll be right back. Hi, everyone, and we're back. So instead of having the panel discussion, which was fantastic, we are going to open it up to a more general discussion. We have some other people who are also with us today, including some people in the room at Cross Labs, and we also have some other people in the call with us. So I'm also going to hand it back over to Jennifer, who is going to continue to moderate this discussion. And yeah, everybody feel free to jump right in and comment and chat and share ideas. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can also ask some questions in YouTube, and I will be your, I guess, ambassador and relay your questions to the discussion here as well. So it's over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm very happy to open up the floor. Maybe people can think about what they'd like to talk about. So there are a few things that maybe we can kind of prompt thinking with, ideas that have come out of the discussion that we just had with our panelists. So I had a little check in the Discord channel, and I can see a lot of excitement there, people talking about all kinds of different things. One of the things that was mentioned in there was the puffer fish that was discovered to make things that look a bit like crop circles to me in the sand. And it seems that this is a sexually selected male behavior, creating this kind of this display structure. So that's I think that's really interesting, and I think that was really nice, as I think it surprised people. It brought a new species where we could see this very impressive capability that we weren't familiar with, and so it kind of I remember being very struck by it when I saw that the footage of those pufferfish doing that. Was quite amazing. But again, it's going to we imagine this is something that's encoded in the genome, that it's a stereotyped, relatively stereotyped behavior that has a large component of kind of innate production mechanism as opposed to learning during life. So that relates back to Andrew. So I mean, the impression I got that you were skeptical, I guess, or you haven't told us yet of much communication in social insects, which isn't of that nature. So I wondered if people might be interested in this and thinking about the duration and the kind of evolution of hard encoded communication. So there's a little prompt that people might want to consider, but otherwise, please do bring in any ideas and any thoughts, any questions for discussion that you'd like. So I'll just stop there and give people a chance to kind of come in. Thinking, Andrew, I'm going to come back to you as a panelist here. What do you think about the duration and I suppose the other side of that, the kind of flexibility of communication in insects? So how long have these messages been transmitted? Do you have any evidence, maybe from looking at some evolutionary comparisons between species, of kind of the extent of flexibility, their ability to change over time, or the kind of potentially quite immense timescales that they've existed for?
Good questions, Jennifer. Look, I'm gonna keep it focused where I know most about, which is the bees. What's interesting is that of all of the extant species of honeybee, all of them dance. So that says to us that dance communication evolved a long way back along the honeybee lineage, is basal to the extant honeybee lineage. There are variations between species in how they dance and the pattern of the dance, and you can put together an evolutionary story about how the dance language that we see in the European honeybee might have been elaborated across evolutionary time. But what that also tells us is that in terms of the duration of these evolved signals, they're changing on the time scale of millions of years. They're not changing rapidly. There's small learned modifications and tweaking and fine-tuning that definitely happens on the time scale of the lifetime and the experience of the single individual. But the pattern of the dance is evolutionarily changing on this time scale of millions of years, not on shorter time scales than that.
That's amazing. So thinking back, I'm imagining that some of the evolution of this group is associated with the evolution of flowering plants. So we're going back. So we're kind of putting that, and you told us this whole honeybee radiation, tens of millions of years at least. And I'm wondering, so one of my research interests is in evolutionary convergence and parallelism. How much do you think that in the wider social insects, you have something that might be a kind of tendency towards evolving communication that has then been done in kind of different ways, different sort of modalities, mechanisms, for example, the movement of the bees, but there's also widespread pheromone communication, I imagine. So do you think that they have a sort of special capacity, this wider group, including thinking about ants and bees and maybe even more widely across insects?
So if we're talking about the social insects, which I know something about, then yes, I think there's both a capacity in that they've got a nervous system and a brain that is complex enough to be able to support this kind of thing. And there's also a massive evolutionary selection pressure for them to be able to share information about valuable foraging sources. I mean, the benefit of being a social insect is you being able to cooperatively forage, which means that there's enormous selective pressure for sharing information about where valuable resources are. And absolutely, in different lineages of bees and in different lineages of ants, they have got different specific ways that they're solving that communication problem. So in the honeybees, the extant honeybees, they're very much using a symbolic movement to communicate. If we look in bumblebees, they're using sense and a less directed movement, but there's still a movement element to it. If we go into the stingless bees, it's even more scent-based. And there's some completely different types of dance movement that might function, but it's less well studied and less well understood. So yeah, in a way, you've got convergence on communication, but how that's achieved is really variable between different lineages.
Yeah, that's amazing and really interesting, and part of, I think, a wider evolutionary theme where we often see that there are perhaps, as you say, both kind of genetic developmental events that occur and make things possible, and then a whole array of kind of interactions with the kind of adaptive pressures that are then opened up. I suppose sometimes if you think about things like niche construction, or how much things can create their own, affect the pressures that then affect their evolution. So then we have kind of adaptation, and then you can get a kind of elaboration within a group, potentially increasing the probability of kind of successful outcomes then, because you have a lot of exploration of a theme in different ways, I suppose. And that's something, I mean, there are so many examples of that, I think, in evolution. If we thinking back about sexual selection, where we kind of came in thinking about the pufferfish, those signals, I mean, things like the birds of paradise, you have a kind of whole group where you have very different, amazing, different kinds of plumage, different kinds of dance, again, different vocalizations, but they're all sort of doing a similar thing. They're all expressing these bizarre behaviors and exaggerated traits, but in a whole range of kind of exploratory different ways. That's amazing. I think we might have we have Andy here. Andy, would you like to come in and say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to, and Andy will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that because the bees, the social insects, they're all Hymenoptera, and the thing is that it's, broadly speaking, it's as good for their sisters' genes to survive as theirs are. So it's not only that there's a genetic tendency, it is for evolution. They can be collective, right? It's like a tautology that it's good for them to cooperate. So I think that's why it comes about. I don't think it's like there's a genetic, it just, evolution will find that way, right? So that they will communicate together. But you get to see amazing stuff with, tandem running in ants, where it's been characterized as teaching, but the ant, one of the ants will lead another ant, and they will pinch the back of their leg to sort of slow them down if they're going too fast. And there's kind of lots of very interesting styles of this. But for me, it's just all really that it's just because they have this thing where there's a single reproductive female and lots of different males mate, and so the genetics means that you can you can have this communication. And it's just, yeah, then evolution allows these things to happen.
But by the way, to avoid confusion, this was Andy Philippides. I don't know. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm too far from. Oh, I have a mic here.
Oh, you
So many mics. So this is Andy Philippides, who is at the University of Sussex and yeah, working in biology, robotics, neuroscience, and a bunch of like many aspects of cognition. Yeah. Many
yeah, I sort of and I work on ants and bees. So and yeah, I would look at visual learning in those insects. So and yeah, basically, ants are wingless bees. They're just easier to work with because they don't fly off. So you can follow them by walking around. So yeah, that's my bias.
Excellent to have you with us.
Thank you. That's, of course, an excellent point. I remember having lectures about the complex genetic system of the Hymenoptera as a zoology undergraduate when I was younger. So I remember puzzling over the extent of relatedness between different individuals. So that's fantastic. That probably may be one of these key innovations that allows this group to kind of puts them in a position to be able to evolve in different ways in a kind of parallel directions. There are, of course, other social groups which don't have this kind of particular special genetic connection, exaggerating the relatedness between individuals. So we are one, of course. I think that is it correct that termites do not show a special kind of extent of relatedness between individuals, but still a social, perhaps some other examples, maybe naked mole rats. Perhaps you could help me with by thinking of some more. How important do you think this kind of genetic connection, a kind of direct selection on things like altruism, on social connections? How is that crucial? Is it there some of the time, but it's not essential? What are your thoughts on that? Perhaps both of our Andrews might be able to contribute very well on this.
As the proper biologist, I'm going to let Andy Barron go first because I think naked mole rats are quite genetically related, right? I think there's a genetic component there.
There is, but there's not the weird haplodiploidy that you get in the Hymenoptera. And I think, the way that I think about the story is, we've had at least eight independent evolutions of eusociality in the Hymenoptera. So it's kicked off a lot. And I think it's kicked off a lot because of the weird genetics in the Hymenoptera. But you don't need that enhanced relatedness of haplodiploidy to evolve altruism and cooperative and social behavior. And the termites and naked mole rats and many of the social species are examples of, yes, you can get cooperative social behavior as a consequence of the ecological pressures without that extra special nudge of haplodiploidy. And where we look at these highly eusocial species, in every case, it's a matter where there's an enormous payback for cooperative foraging. So we see that in the termites, we see that in the naked mole rats as well. It's that if you're on your own, you're going to really struggle. But if you're a group, you can hit a big bonanza if you cooperate. There's big benefits to cooperation. So the non-genetic element is going to be the benefits of cooperation, setting up a selective pressure for cooperative behavior.
And presumably the same would go for language, right? To bring it back to the language communication, it's really the evolutionary pressures that drive this. Drive. I don't know if your brain's going to put energy into building up a proper system of communication, it better be worth it for the energy that you get back in from foraging.
Can we learn anything from these kind of examples about the kind of selection pressures that we might want to place on AI if we wanted it to evolve more enhanced communication?
At risk of dangerously speaking beyond my expertise, I don't think that we necessarily evolve AI. I mean, I know there's some people who play around with genetic algorithms in AI development, but I think often AI goes through a more designer process rather than evolutionary process. Me personally, I'm not that much in favor of non-directed, spontaneous evolutionary solutions in an AI space. More likely to give us something that we might not want rather than something that we do want.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
that's.
So please, Alyssa, go ahead.
I was going to say that's a really interesting point. I mean, yeah, it's really interesting to think about selection pressure and our ability to communicate and all these different things. Because I have like three things that, or maybe two things that really stick out in my mind along this thread. And the first one is trying to think about how the way that we've designed the world around us is so human centric that I wonder how many opportunities we're missing to interact with other creatures in meaningful ways. And I'm thinking, I'm even thinking about our pets too, and the way that we design our furniture and the way that we design our houses. And I was thinking, like, if I was a pet in an alien landscape, it might be really hard to communicate just because I can't reach things and things are really uncomfortable. Things might be really bright. I mean, even if I'm not thinking about it exactly, it would be a world that is designed for aliens and not necessarily for me. So that would make that would make communication really, really difficult. And I think that relates to evolutionary pressure in some sort of way, although I'm not completely sure. But it makes me wonder that you know, how the world, I guess, like, the how the environment is set up and how much that influences our ability to communicate. And I guess, like, with AI and even just technology more broadly, not necessarily just AI, thinking about how we have a lot of social pressures to communicate on a very global scale just because there's like 8 billion of us, right? And in order to, I don't know, achieve such kind of communication, we've had a lot of pressure to build these kinds of technologies like our phones and things like 5G and high-speed internet that really just makes that kind of stuff possible. But it's not necessarily that, I don't know, it's kind of, is it an evolutionary pressure that we've sort of designed in our environment? Is it an evolutionary pressure that, I guess, like, was inevitable from the beginning of human evolution or human existence, I guess? I don't know if there's really a question there, but just all these ideas are sticking out in my mind, and I guess I wanted to share them and see what other people think.
I'd like to share a few things.
Of course.
Um, I, I couldn't forget what Lana said about people finding out about the Google person he actually got fired by Google, not because of his sentiment, but I guess he violated a security policy, where he claims that the AI machine is sentient already, and that's why he's afraid of it. And so my background is from AI training before the whole GPT system exploded. And so I know how to build AI machines from the ground up. And so I have an idea how these things are built and how they are trained and how they develop and learn. It's almost like raising a child, as I was sharing with one of you yesterday. Um, Depending on the environment and the words and the education that you provide the machine, then that's where it pulls the information and the data and the training from. So if that machine said, I'm conscious, it's actually pre-trained to say something like that. So I'm not sure if there's anyone in the group who has this background, who's built, please feel free to chime in. But for example, if I'm training an AI powered machine to understand dog, then I want that machine to be smart enough that it will understand that dog also means inu in Japanese or aso in Filipino in many other languages. So if the machine was not trained in these other words or the synonyms or the intents behind one word, then it wouldn't understand. It wouldn't have anything to say. So I just wanted to share that. I don't think the AI machines in the world right now are conscious, but I think it could head there. But I just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, I think that when we train, especially like when we raise I mean, we raise children, but also like when we learn about the world as we grow up, I mean, we're training each other. And I think I read somewhere that humans domesticate each other. And I really liked that. You know, it's sort of like if we sort of lived in isolation just in the woods without society, we, you know, would lose our language in one generation, I believe it is. You know, not an expert. I wish I was in this super interesting topics, but that always strikes me as you know, again, like the constraints, the training, the way that we program each other, the way that we I don't know, influence each other has so much influence on how we communicate. And other animals, other animals too, right? You know, I also wanted to share some thoughts about raccoons. Right. So raccoons, I think they're absolutely fast, and crows as well, and other urban animals that have learned to adapt to cities, right? I wish we knew more about how they communicated before integrating with human society versus after integrating human society. I'd be super interested to know how living in an urban landscape changes the way that they're communicating with each other. I don't know if any of the animal communication experts in the call or in the room have an answer, but I'd be really curious to, I don't know, hear if anybody knows anything about that kind of stuff, or I don't know.
I think there's an example from cats, which is related, that people have, it has been suggested that feral cats show, feral domestic cats show a higher sociality between each other. They sort of start packing compared to their close relatives, the wild type, which is more solitary. So this would be an example, probably, but potentially controversial like many studies, but a potential example where humans have created a selection pressure which has altered the social behavior quite fundamentally of the species. I'm not personally aware of how that's influenced the communication, but we can imagine that it should have. Are there any more examples that people know about?
I've got a slightly bad one for dog owners, which is that if you look at if you look at like a ratio of brain size to actual size, and then there's this kind of straight line that everyone lies on, and dogs are below the line, showing they're kind of a bit dumber than we would expect, whereas wolves are not, and it's basically down to domestication, that they no longer have to go out and find food and do all those complex things. But I guess it does speak to, you know, maybe it means they're more social and that's the thing, but maybe sociality isn't the hard bit. Maybe, you know, having a fight for your dinner every day is actually and stay alive and stay warm is the more difficult bit than I don't know, attaching tokens to certain external signals. But, you know, I'm speculating, I'm waving my hands around, but yeah, who knows?
That's sort of goes back to the point we had before about whether evolution sort of drives communication, and that's the Wittgensteinian way to see it, right? Even in AI or simulation studies about evolution of communication, you have the pressure to be more efficient and to pass on more useful, helpful information for survival, and we help each other, and everything is good. Turns out that there are opposite effects, and Jen, you mentioned sexual selection and things like that, and there's trickery and all of that. But there is also a nice point of view that people who I think people in the room are aware of that. It's the research by Terry Deacon and friends who worked on relaxation of selection in diverse species that led to the evolution of a complexifying language, right, or communication. So the signal complexified as you relax the selection pressure for something, and domestication that you mentioned earlier was an example of that for finches, for example. So, or the different examples of that, right? That's super interesting. And that was for a while very, very nice, and it still is, I think, for several species. You have several strong examples of that happening. And that's really the opposite, right? So instead of evolution driving evolution was holding you back from complexifying your communication, right? So there's something very fundamental about that shows us how we can be tricked about overinterpreting pressures. It doesn't mean that evolution doesn't drive communication, right? It means that something else drives complexity, which is important.
Yeah, that also relates back to this idea of dogs, I think. So it's interesting. We must have greatly, well, we've got some very peculiar selection on dogs for all kinds of very, very strange traits. We're feeding them, so we have greatly reduced. What we've almost we give them infinite energy, so they no longer there's a potential to have a very large body size in some breeds. So some breeds are enormous, and we generally keep feeding them. There are some interesting cases, that situations of war, where it's no longer been possible for a population to, or they have decided not to support these kind of I don't want to call it parasites. Seems like a very critical word to describe a dog, but these hangers on to our society. So I think in Britain during the Second World War there was culling of dogs, because then there was a tight selection for food supply. So I'm not sure about the historical veracity of that, but it's certainly a story I've heard. On the other hand, we've got some very tiny breeds where we've greatly reduced the body size. So we've messed around a lot with this encephalization quotient, the ratio of brain size to body size in dogs. So I think that's really interesting. There's been both, you could think about relaxation of selection in terms of our provision of food supplies, and extreme selection for sometimes quite trivial traits, the coloration, the pointiness of the ears, all these kind of things. So yeah, I'm curious to look into some more of that research that you mentioned, Andy, and find out about what's happened to, say, the number of neurons in the dog's brain in different breeds. I don't know if that research exists.
Yeah, I'm not sure. These were just sort of coarse numbers on the kind of expected sort of brain size, or different regions of brain size. But there is you can there's some experiments on, I can't remember which fish breed it is, that if you breed for an increased brain size, you can breed them, and quite easily you can increase the brain size and important brain size areas in 2 or 3 generations. But it turns out that they do worse at surviving, because the extra energy, it's something to do with the stomach, that they stop the extra energy to maintain this bigger brain is not good for them, and so they get out competed by the smaller brain sized ones. So I think it's, we tend to think it's, I don't know if the A-life thing, we shouldn't just get dominated by the brain. There's a lot going on in the rest of us. But yeah, maybe it's not all about brain size. I hope it's not about brain size, because I'll be in trouble.
There's a global brain size, I guess. Your population, your reservoir computer, that is your swarm or your colony. And it's okay to say, I think it's okay to say that dogs parasitized us. Right, I think that's as a technical term, we parasitize physics as living beings in the first place, right? So we're all parasites of something until down to the last turtle. But there's if we self-domesticate, then we parasitize ourselves, right? That's what we assume is true. So the language or communication systems are a way to parasitize our own systems. Would that be correct? So do ants and bees, did they evolve a way to hack their own systems in that way, so to create a feedback loop? I say that in another way, in the way that I heard from Alyssa and Jean. So we grow organs as we go, right? And some of them are designed; those are called tools. And I guess communication protocols are some of those tools. But prosthetics or phones are also those kind of tools, and we grow them as we grow organs, right? To interface with something. to a behavior that we can't reach easily. Some of those tools affect our survival immediately. If you invent agriculture, that's pretty helpful for you. You can do a lot of things now. I'm guessing a bunch of those were steps, evolutionary phases in evolution. So this feels like some of those interfaces allow you to do more things together, and that feels like that's the communication thread.
Are you just to jump? Are you? But I mean, are we getting a bit confused with like stigmergic stuff? So, I mean, so for anyone not familiar with stigmergy, so stigmergy is the idea that you get communication, but it's through a trace left in the environment. So the classic example would be ants leaving a pheromone and it's sort of depositing outside. I think more pertinent in this case is kind of like the with the termites, who when they're dropping to make these incredible structures, they drop something, they drop the ball of mud, and then that ball of mud is slightly attractive, and so these things build up. So that's at the very insect level. And you could argue this stigmergic signal, we use paper and pens as to allow us. So I don't know if I think at one level, they have evolved to use the environment as a thing, but I don't. If we then have to pick an indirect, something that's separate from the environment that they're kind of using as a secondary signal, I'm not sure. We might get lost a bit in definitions of how separate something is. Kind of like in the tool use examples where spiders' webs aren't tools because they're still connected to the body, right? So anyway, we could get lost in definitions about tool use. There's a whole other discussion there, but Andy, any thoughts from you? Andy, are you gonna save me from my waffling?
No, you're waffling so beautifully, Andy. Keep going, mate. I was enjoying it.
This makes me wonder, how can we distinguish between learning and evolved, kind of encoded, hard encoded communication or behavior more widely, as we move away from kind of familiar animal systems, where to me that I feel quite happy. I can see what is learning and what is evolved, as one happens within an individual lifetime, and the other is brought to them. Although I can see, obviously, I'm thinking there about, but there are a lot of complexities and nuances even there. But as we move out, and if we think about other biological groups, or if we think about AI, is this relevant? Can we make this distinction?
So I got a paper from a while back talking about how learning has to come before instinct, because there's a real integration between these two phenomena. And whenever you look at anything that we say that's instinctive, you can always find a bit of it where there's a bit of learning, there's a little bit of modification and adjustment and stuff like that. You don't get things pure instinctive or pure learning. And even when you look at things that we're saying that they're learning, you realize, yes, but it's using sensory systems and processing and ways of interpreting the world that have not been learned. So nothing is either A or B. There's always elements of these two phenomena in pretty much every behavioral trait that we look at. And the model that I put forward was that the most likely way that you get an instinct is that you have something that was initially a learned trait, and then selection acts for it to be easier to learn. And over time, what happens is that what had been learned initially becomes more and more canalized, to the point that it's either learned in one shot, or we don't recognize it as being learned, and that kind of thing takes place. But my main point is that most of the traits that we look at, the distinction between learning and instinct is a judgment call, not an is that we're not dealing with absolute categories, is the way that I think about it.
I would say that because I studied one of the things that I study in the bees and ants is this interplay between the evolved, how much of stuff is evolved in, because they do, I study the behaviors they do called a learning flight. The bees, when they come out, they'll do this structured, semi-structured flight, which is obviously massively idiosyncratic, but has certain motifs that make the learning, that structure the incoming information to make it easier to learn and easier to recall. I'm not sure exactly how, but they certainly do that. So I think it's like Andy says, it's that we often think of the innate behavior as scaffolding the learning, but I think it's probably the learning would come first, and then you scaffold something on top, and it's this interplay. To go back, I think more generally, Jennifer, I think maybe it's also, if you were trying to look at the differences in maybe the timescales, that that learning, or something we call the learning behavior rather than the instinctual behavior, maybe happens or changes happen at a quicker time and maybe forgotten easier. But that's just speculation. But maybe certainly in the artificial systems where we've got artificial evolution going around something that's learning, the learning happens on a quick scale and the evolution is at slower sort of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting, and it's interesting to think about the potential temporal duration of an individual AI, which I imagine so far has been relatively short, but theoretically is much longer than an individual animal lifespan. So we think about AI, we may have the potential for something to be not as time limited as biological organisms are in our experience on Earth. Sort of playing out for a long time, there might not be such a clear distinction between evolution and learning within a kind of a relatively unconstrained individual lifetime. And kind of pulling out a few things there that people have talked about, I guess if we wanted to have a greater capacity in AI for either evolution or learning, or this kind of less clearly distinguished combination of the two, I guess we have people have brought up, I think, things that we're talking about a much richer environment for this learning entity. So Alyssa was talking about this, for example, thinking about the things that it can do. How is it constrained? What could it learn? And then the capacity for it to interact with others socially. But then, of course, as Andrew says, if we fully were able to give a completely open capacity for evolving AI to match, what I'm going to call the real world, then we also have no control over what it does develop the ability to do. That's very interesting, I think.
I'd like to bring back. I'd like to bring back the attention on something that Andy P. you mentioned in the Discord channel in the beginning, which is the Wittgenstein's quote, or somewhat of a quote. What was it? Was it
if a lion could speak, we would not be able to understand him.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
well, then I should say.
Exactly. So to some extent, maybe it's right. And yeah, so what's how right is that? And so I think the first some of the first topics we touched on yesterday were about archaeology being already very difficult to interpret. Like our own traces of our own ancestors a few generations away. Just a few years ago. Okay, centuries maybe. It gets very difficult very quickly, and we have a lot of context, and we have very similar embodiments to our previous selves. What can we really do with something that is slightly more different?
I have a related statement or question. Yes, I was thinking about earlier. I'm thinking about interspecies communication and the idea of the robotic bee, and how that robotic bee was able to essentially send signals or to communicate with the rest of the hive and say, go to this location and so on and so forth. And I'm wondering if that is an example of at least one-way communication, or if it's not an example, or if there are like limitations to that. Yeah, so I'll just add that to Olaf's comment.
Andrew, would you like to come in on that? So it seems to me that the robot bee, I guess, is sort of perhaps it's in a sort of an embodiment of our intentions in communicating. Is that possible? Or do you view it as has it become something itself? Is it itself capable of communication? What do the bees think about it, Andrew?
I mean, yeah, I think it's fair enough to say that the robot bee was a tool that was giving one-way communication to other bees. It was giving a very, very precise signal to other bees who were able to interpret it, and we were able to see they had interpreted it because we knew where they went. It was a beautiful study, and again, it was a tool for manipulating bees' communication system to help us work out what the communication system is. But I think, yeah, it's fair enough to say that a tool like that does at least give us one-way communication of a sort. But it also highlights the limitations in honeybee dance communication, which is why I call it dance communication rather than dance language. Because it's there's very specific information that dances can communicate. It doesn't have the same generalizable structure like a human language, It's specific types of movement that communicate specific types of information, and that's quite defined. That you would only change that over evolutionary time. You couldn't change that over the duration of learning and individual lifetimes.
Yeah, in a way, the purpose of the robot bee. Sorry, it's a bit of a leap here, and my mind wandered for a bit. Is that maybe our only chance to understand better a communication system, and the bee one may be more complex than we currently understand, and I haven't followed the latest, right? But is maybe to insert ourselves and try out what it. I was going to say what it's like to be a bee, but that would be a stretch. Although I mean, at least we can try. We can build VR systems, and a few people have tried a few things like that. That would be tremendously interesting. Of course, we'd be super biased, like we said in the beginning, by our own human interpretations under interpretations of various behaviors. But at least seeing what the response graph looks like. And yeah, maybe that's one way to explore the communication system. Is there a different one from yesterday? We talked the same way about aliens, right? If you are confronted with an alien species in front of you, you'll have a first warming up phase where you're going to exchange and maybe point at things if you can. If you cannot, you'll try to find standards, regularities, things you can interpret. Maybe that's the same thing that we're doing actively instead of observing passively. Maybe there's a different approach in biology. Like either you observe and draw causal conclusions, or you insert yourself and do a sort of more active, intrusive experiments. What is the state of things for bees actually? Would that be helpful, or is that better not so fruitful possibly?
I mean, in terms of understanding a communication system, it's always both. It starts off with careful observation, but then once you've got a hypothesis, then the best way to test it is usually some sort of intervention, some sort of, as you said, some sort of insertion of yourself into the communication system, so that you can actually test your understanding of how you think it works. I don't think that we've learned every element about bee dance communication yet. It's amazing how every year there's papers that come out that refine our understanding just a little bit more. And this is something that's been studied. It was, I want to say 1910 that von Frisch published his first letter. I'm going to now think I've probably got that horribly wrong. But, you know, after over 100 years of study, we're still finding out the subtleties and the nuances in this system. It's a long way away from us. It's not an easy one to study. It takes place in the dark and the private inside a hive. But it is nice that even in something like a bee, we're still, after all this intense study, still discovering new things about it.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And it's a good mystery to, I think, end our discussion for today. This was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, all of our panelists and all of our guests. And of course, thank you so much, Jennifer, for being a fantastic moderator today. This was really fun. We really enjoyed it. And for everybody who is with us here on YouTube, and also for everybody else who is with us in the call and in the room, please join us tomorrow 2 hours earlier. That is going to be, oh, sorry, a little bit earlier than that. It's going to be at 2 p.m. Japan time, which is, of course, check your time zone, but 2 p.m. Japan time on Wednesday. And we're going to be talking about the session that we pretty much just segued right into. We're going to be talking about perception, private language, sensing, embodiment, and consciousness as well, because this all has a lot to do with communication. So tomorrow we're going to be diving right into that. All right, everybody. So that's it for Cross Labs, today's second session on universal communication. Thank you all so much for joining us. Bye.